Need custom beer labels fast? At InTouch Labels and Packaging, we deliver industry-leading 3-day turnaround on every order, regardless of quantity. We carry a wide assortment of die-cut templates in standard and custom shapes and sizes. With a combination of top-of-the-line machines and experienced operators, InTouch can pump out an astonishing quantity of custom labels quickly. Our competitive pricing means you get top-quality labels without breaking the bank. Need help? Our top-tier customer service is here to assist you every step of the way. So why wait? Get your custom labels with lightning-fast 3-day turnaround and unbeatable service at InTouch Labels and Packaging, where your brand gets the attention it deserves.
Hi, and welcome to our presentation on extending shelf life by removing oxidizing metals. I'm Alan Windhausen, and joining me today is Eric.
Hello.
So let's just dive right into it. So our learning objectives for today are we want to be able to allow you to know the sources of metal ions in wort and beer, understand the role they play in oxidation, understand how metal chelation and can remove them, and also understand that chelation and removal at a base level. And so we're going to be looking at tannin-based products that can chelate and remove those metal ions. So first, let's talk about some metals and oxidation.
All right. So why are metal ions in my beer? Well, the primary concern is about iron and copper. And we'll see why iron and copper are significantly more of a concern when we discuss the mechanism of this. The bulk of metal ions, in fact, 96% in beer, are unavoidable, coming from the grain and mashing. Small amounts may be in the water, could be your water source, your piping, but there's also trace amounts of in the hops, particularly manganese, and especially in dry hopping. So why do I care? Well, you should care because oxygen is a large concern with oxidation. However, breweries already go through great lengths to reduce oxygen or O2 in beer, purging tanks, transferring under pressure with either carbon dioxide or nitrogen. Packaging lines are designed to limit oxygen, and of course, capping on foam when packaging as well. As much as it can be avoided, there is a practical limit. Complete oxygen removal is, in fact, impossible. But fortunately, molecular oxygen is largely unreactive in beer or in headspace. A major way that molecular oxygen becomes highly reactive is through contact with transitional metal ions, making a cascade of oxidations. So we're going to discuss reactive oxygen species, or ROS. ROS are highly reactive forms of oxygen and potent oxidizers. The oxidation of desirable flavor molecules is what causes staling in the beer. So they attack any molecule in proximity, including flavor molecules. They also form from mechanical reduction. I'm sorry, from chemical reduction or collision with radicals. Reduction is gaining of electrons, and radicals are molecules or atoms, ions that have one or more unpaired electrons. Metal ions play a vital role in forming these ROS. They accelerate their formation and can occur from mashing through storage on the shelf.
And you may have heard that wort and beer have natural antioxidants in them. The problem is these can kind of be used up during the brewing process, or worse, they can also reduce the metal ions again so that they're able to contribute to staling through oxidation over and over and over again. And we'll see that when we kind of explore this mechanism, which is the Fenton and Haber-Weiss reactions. So this is a fairly complex set of reactions that are the oxidation through these ROS formations. Key to note, though, is here you have this molecular oxygen that is not particularly reactive. These M's are going to be these transition metals in different states. So what happens is it will give an electron and create a more reactive version, or one of these ROSs, these reactive oxygen states. So anytime you see these little dots here, these are going to be these highly reactive forms that are going to cause oxidation and staling throughout your beer. So the key thing to note is you have oxygen that the metal comes and makes more reactive, and then the metal can come back again to create these other compounds kind of throughout the beer. And the metal is what's facilitating this action in every case. And here you can see that this is a something that will come and cause that metal to go back to a state where it can then react again. And there's also going to be some reactions that happen between the some of these ions and water that allow the metal to go back to its lower state and then go through and just create more and more of these reactive oxygen species. So the main thing to note is that all of these reactive oxygen species are really coming from interactions with these transition metal ions, particularly copper and iron. Manganese is going to be not as effective as the copper or iron at doing this. The copper and iron are particularly effective in wort at facilitating these reactions. So, long story short, we just need to get rid of these metal ions to stop these reactive oxygen species from forming and impacting your beer in a negative way.
Well, how do we remove the metal? Of course, it's chelation. Chelation. What is that, and how does it work? So chelation is a type of chemical bonding where metal ions are bound in the 3D shape of another molecule or molecules. This inactivates the ion, and it can pull it out of solution.
And the solubility and size of that resultant metal chelate here, which is also called a complex. You may hear them as like metal complexes or chelation complexes. The size and solubility of that resultant chelate is what determines whether it falls out of solution, and the larger complexes tend to fall out of solution more. So the need to remove these ions was really first recognized in the early 80s with some early research on this topic that was done by Charlie Bamforth et al. And a call out was made by him again in 1999 to focus on research of how to remove these metals. But it's only been in the last few years that work has really been done in earnest. And that's been led largely by the PhD research of T.R. Mertens and others. So let's kind of look at some of that research.
So what are good chelators? First of all, polyphenols are, but not all are created equal. There's of the polyphenols, there's a family called tannins that are good chelators. It's a secondary effect of tannic acid or galotannins. Brand names you may recognize from that are Broody or Brutan B. That's been out in the market for a little while. Tannins generally can also inhibit pre-oxidative enzymes and lipid peroxidation in wort.
There has been some research that actually predates the T.R. Mertens one that showed that alpha acids, if you add hop to the mash, doing mash hopping, those alpha acids can be a chelator. But they're not the most effective because those alpha acids are also having so many other interactions with other compounds. And also hops are not particularly cheap. So when you're adding this in for a secondary effect, the hop usage for chelating metal ions is not really cost effective. It also has a limit, and it leaves behind a lot of that metal, even at high doses. And also remember that hops also do add some metals as well. And then for the tannic acid compounds, these are the Bruti, Brutan B. They are well known as having good chelation properties with iron and copper. However, in brewing and wort specifically, that is not really the main effect. It prefers to bind to proteins, which is why tannic acid has been used as a way of creating colloidal stability throughout the process. You're removing these proteins that can cause haze later. So it's much more efficient at removing haze causing proteins and a lot less efficient at binding to these metals when used in beer and wort specifically. So while it does have some effect, it is not going to be the best option if your goal is to remove these transition metals.
Yeah. So recently, Tiers, Mertens et al. Compared different polyphenols with regards to their ability to remove transition metals from wort. And we'll show you a little bit coming up here. But from this, a specific tannin extracted from pomegranates, he found to be most effective.
Yeah, so this is some of the early research that was being done on this. This was done somewhere around 2019, so you're coming up on 6 years ago. So there were a number of these polyphenolic food extracts that were tested. And you'll notice that a lot of these, like green tea, grapeseed, grapefruit, raspberry, these are things that we would consider just as consumers to be antioxidants in our food. They've been promoted as such. You know, you want to eat antioxidants to combat aging in humans and all that. The reason that they are good antioxidants is that they are also removing these metals and things from your diet when you're eating them. So he went through and looked at a number of these different extracts and then found that in particular, some of the preliminary results from the pomegranate extract was that it was really, really good at removing iron, which is actually the biggest concern. And this was before optimization. This was just proof of concept. And so there's some other metals here that it was less effective at, but that has changed over the course of some of this optimization research that we'll get into a little bit later. But the key thing to note is just how dramatically, even in this unoptimized proof of concept, how dramatically it was able to pull out the iron, which is by far our biggest concern. A number of these are actually part of the tannin family tree. So they're all going to be polyphenols. So kind of looking at where this sits with all that. For context, the pomegranate extract is part of this overall family tree. It's actually going to be kind of sitting right here. The tannic acid that has been on the market for a while, the Bruti, the Brutan B, that's going to have a slightly different chemical structure, which explains why it doesn't have the same reaction to these transition metals, and it prefers those proteins. It's similar. It's going to be part of this overall family of known antioxidants. But in wort specifically, this one has a better effect on proteins, whereas this one in particular has really, really strong binding to these transition metals. And it also is not terribly effective at binding to the proteins. So there can be some synergistic effect if you're trying to get colloidal stability and some of this antioxidant shelf life stability. You can use them both. And the tannic acid, Brutan B, Bruti, that's going to preferentially get out all of that protein and colloidal stability, while this provides you that shelf life. They can be used together. There's just some optimization that you need to do so that you're not having them interfere with each other at that time. So we've been talking about trying to get this optimized. We've been talking about how we can really show that this is an effective product. So let's look at that.
Well, how effective is it? The answer is very. And I wish there was just some sort of data that we could look at, some sort of a graph that would show that. There we go. What are we looking at here?
So this is some research that was done, and there's the brand name of this pomegranate extract is Mash Life, so you might see that on a couple of slides. But this pomegranate extract, the main thing to note here is this is going to be a graph showing a control beer and a beer that has the pomegranate extract dosed into it. And this is a measure of the intensity using electron spin. And so what this is doing is creating some of these ROS and showing the oxidative effect that's happening through the formation of free radicals and ROS. So when you have a higher electron spin resonance here, you're going to have a higher amount of those radicals and ROS forming. So this shows that there's going to be a far greater amount of oxidation capability that is in this beer that has not been dosed versus this one that has been dosed at a really low level, 2 grams per hectoliter. And this is even, there's some newer data that we can show that there's even better ways of using it. But the main point to note here is just how dramatically it lowers the oxidative potential of a beer that has been dosed versus one that has not been.
Yeah. And how and when to use. The chelating agents are often unstable at a low pH, and so it should be done on the hot side when the pH is a little higher. And then additionally, the metal removal earlier in the process leads to less opportunities for oxidation, less contact time, or more contact time is the better, obviously, with that. Forthcoming optimization research shows the best efficacy when added at the start of the boil or split between the start of the boil, start of the mash and the boil. So you can really dial it in by going in both segments there.
Yeah, and so these chelating agents, because they are such large molecules, this is true of any of the chelating agents, not just this particular one. But the chelating agents with these large 3D shapes, as the pH gets lower, those shapes can kind of get a little wobbly, so they become less effective at this kind of binding to the iron or the copper and pulling it out. So that's the main reason that you want to do that. And then also with those having less opportunities for those ROS to interact with the beer during production also is just a benefit. You're creating a fresher beer from the get-go. The data does show that there is not a taste difference between a fresh beer that's been dosed and a fresh beer that has not been dosed. The impact comes over the course of the next several months as there is this greater chance of oxidation in package and this continued impact of these metals over time. So a beer 3 months, 5 months down the line will taste fresher than one that has not been dosed. But it's a good thing, actually, that there's no taste difference at the outset, because that tells you that the beer that you're packaging without this and the beer that you're packaging with this is the same product. That's actually a benefit. And so this forthcoming optimization research, this is a continuation of Tior's work. It's being done by somebody who was working with him in that initial research, Thomas Kunze. There's been some additional research that shows how to best use this. But that research is going to be presented in actually a couple weeks. So we can't show those graphs. So instead, I have a different graph that just shows the earlier you add it, the better. And so this is a graph that shows the efficacy by adding it earlier. All 3 of these are products that were packaged and then tested for their oxidative capacity. So basically, how much can they be oxidized? So we have a control that has a dramatic amount of oxidative capacity. This is just a beer that was brewed and packaged. This is a beer that was dosed downstream. So it was a beer that was finished, then it was dosed, and then it was packaged. So this was a finished beer with some of these antioxidants. It was actually a blend because this research was done when we weren't sure if it was better to have the tannic acid and the ellagic acid, the polyphenol extract. So this was done with a blend, with a blend of those. But subsequent research has shown that just adding the Almost all of this oxidative reduction comes from that polyphenol that comes from pomegranates. So the main point of this chart is to show when you add nothing, you have a very high oxidative potential. You have a very high risk of your beer becoming oxidized at some point soon. Then when you add it at the end, it does dramatically reduce how much oxidation that beer can undergo, how much staling that beer can undergo, and how quickly. But it's actually best to add it even earlier in the process. This was added in the mash. The research that has been that is going to be coming out soon actually says the best time to add it is at the start of boil, or splitting your dose 50-50 between the start of the mash and the start of boil, and then it can get down even lower. So the main point of this is you want to add it earlier in the process, as early as possible. And our goal is to keep beer fresh as the day you brewed it.
Yep, absolutely. We're hoping we're going to be seeing a lot of folks doing some trials on true to brand and aging, and hopefully increasing the shelf life availability for your beers, keeping them in stores longer, keeping the distributors from pulling them, keeping them tasting better and fresher out in the market, even when you're exporting to other countries. So this is very exciting product that's come out, and hopefully it has a good effect.
It's also worth noting too that with any of these reactions where you're creating these ROS, for any chemical reaction, if you increase the temperature of whatever it is, in this case the beer, if you increase the temperature, as in like having it be on a warm shelf or having it go into a truck and be transported, the warmer something is, the faster these rates of reactions occur. So if you have a beer that's being transported or it's sitting on a warm shelf, this oxidation occurs faster. That's just a standard fact about beer and oxidation. But with this product, it does actually, because it's reducing the potential for those to form in the first place, you are having a better outcome, even if it is a little bit warmer. So that's one way to actually do some of these tests, is to do forced oxidation, where you're warming the product up and having these oxidation reactions occur faster. And so you can see, even from a forced oxidative test, that it will decrease the chance of staling. Otherwise, triangle testing, and even if you're doing forced oxidation, triangle testing is a good way of testing it to show that that's the case. And there's lots of data out there on how to do that, but we always are available to help if there's any questions about any of the technical aspects of how to do those kind of sensory. So with that, feel free to reach out to either Eric or myself with any questions. Our emails are on the screen. You can also reach out to our company overall. We have we've been around since 1887, and so we have 130 odd years of technical support. We have our own lab in the UK. We are able to have any of these tests done, and we are a technical resource for brewers who have questions about this or any other brewing concerns. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.